Welcome back to the Just to Start YouTube channel, and in this episode, we will be going over the Week 7 game predictions for the season. Alright guys, before we get into the Week 7 game predictions, let's do a little recap of Week 6. Last week, my picks were 9 and 6. However, my lock of the week was wrong. I had the Bills beating the Falcons as lock of the week, so now the giveaway pot at the end of the year is up to $100 right now. Make sure you guys like and subscribe to have a chance to win the free money at the end of the year. It's the easiest giveaway you guys can be part of, and just make sure you comment on at least one of these videos that I'm posting. The more comments you have, the better chances. And like I said, for the lock of the week this week, I'm gonna do a little experiment, and I'll talk to it when we get to that game. And then the Week 6 player of the week, for the first time ever, we're gonna have a repeat back-to-back winner. Rico Dowdle in Week 5 was amazing, and Week 6 was fantastic as well. He had 30 carries, 183 rushing yards, 4 receptions, 56 yards, a touchdown, and the big win over the Dallas Cowboys. Rico Dowdle has had an amazing 2-game stretch and is, I think, top 5 in rushing yards in the NFL, and he honestly may have just took the starting job over Chuba Hubbard now. And for the fantasy football fans, the Week 7 start of the week is Caleb Williams versus the New Orleans Saints. I think the Saints' run defense is pretty solid, so I'm expecting Caleb Williams to have to pass the ball to actually move the ball. The Saints give up the 29th most points against quarterbacks in fantasy, and they really don't have a cornerback 1 or cornerback 2. A lot of receivers always have big games against them, and Caleb Williams is getting better and better throughout the season, so he is my Week 7 start. All right, let's get right into things. The first matchup tomorrow is our Thursday night football matchup. We have the Steelers versus the Bengals, and to be honest, this feels like a classic Mike Tomlin trap game. Mike Tomlin and the Pittsburgh Steelers are really bad on the road on Thursday Night Football. History usually repeats itself. The Steelers' cornerbacks were also banged up in their matchup against Cleveland. Jalen Ramsey was down for a little bit. Darius Slay, Brandon Echols. So it's interesting to see Joey Porter Jr. I mean, even seen down here, Deshaun Elliott did not participate in the Wednesday practice. So it's interesting to see who plays in this game. Also, Trey Hendrickson didn't participate in practice, and he's questionable. This game has a lot of potential big players sitting out. Earlier in the season, it felt like Pittsburgh was prone to giving up big plays against wide receivers. I could see Jamar Chase continuing his good season or T. Higgins having his breakout game this year. However, the one positive for Pittsburgh is their run defense over the last 2 games has finally solidified into being one of the better run defenses in the league. They just shut down Quinshon Judkins on Sunday. So I'm curious to see if they can continue to stop Chase Brown. He only has 74 attempts for 202 rushing yards. That's a 2.7 average per rush. That's terrible. So I'm interested to see if the Steelers' run defense continues to hold up. And going over to the Bengals, I think that Joe Flacco has definitely been an upgrade over Jake Browning. The offense was able to move the ball, and they just look like a more complete offense against the Packers. With all that in mind, like I said, I just think history repeats itself, and I'm picking the Cincinnati Bengals to upset the Steelers in this matchup. The Steelers just don't play well on the road on Thursday Night Football. It's an AFC North matchup. They always tend to be a close matchup, and I just think that the Bengals are going to squeak this one out in a close, low-scoring game. So give me the Bengals in this Week 7 matchup. All right, next up we have the Rams versus the Jaguars, and I think the obvious thing this week is if Puka Nacua is going to play. And I just think, obviously, the Rams' offense is naturally going to regress if he doesn't play. But I still think it's an above-average offense with Kyron Williams, Devontae Adams, Tutu Atwell, and obviously Matthew Stafford playing at an elite level right now. 1,684 passing yards, 12 touchdowns, 2 interceptions. And LA's defense is pretty underrated with defensive coordinator Chris Shula. And then going over to the Jags, I think the Jags are one of the more overrated teams. However, last week, Brian Thomas Jr. finally had his breakout game against Seattle. They were obviously without their top corners. So we'll see if they can continue to do that this week. I think a real problem is staying on the topic of Brian Thomas Jr., even though he had a big week last week, the real issue with Brian Thomas Jr. is his drops, man. It's continuing to drop passes that should be easy catches. He can easily have 400-plus receiving yards on the year if he can just make simple catches, potentially even 500. So I'm interested to see how they use Brian Thomas Jr. this week. Taking that all into account, I'm picking the Rams, even if Puka Nacua doesn't play. I just think that the better coach team, the better team overall, have the better quarterback, and I trust their defense a little bit more. Next up, we have the New Orleans Saints versus the Chicago Bears. And things that I'm going to be looking forward to in this game are, is DJ Moore even going to play, or is he going to be out for a while? he stayed overnight in the hospital with his injury, and that's concerning, even though it was said not to be a serious injury, and he was described to be day-to-day, so it'll be interesting to see, but I really don't think it's going to matter. I think Rome Odunze and Luther Burden can manage the workload against the weak Saints secondary and their passing defense. I also think this game relies on how well Caleb Williams can pass the ball. Like I alluded to earlier, I think the Saints' run defense is actually pretty underrated. And I think that Caleb Williams is going to have to continue his solid season. Almost 1,200 passing yards, 9 touchdowns, 2 interceptions, limiting the turnovers. And I think that's going to be a big way for them to win this week. I think the Bears are going to struggle to run the ball in this game, like I said. And I think the reason why I'm picking the Bears in this matchup is I just think the Saints is pretty bad. And I think that this can be a big Rome Odunze game. I'm just interested to see how Ben Johnson incorporates Luther Burden in this game plan. If I'm not mistaken, we saw Luther Burden a decent amount, and he had a couple nice receptions. So I'm interested to see how the rookie looks against the secondary without potentially DJ Moore. But with that being said, give me the Bears in this Week 7 matchup. All right, next up we have the Cleveland Browns versus the Miami Dolphins. I think Devon Achane is the most dynamic player in the offense, and Jalen Waddle is a close second. But I'm interested to see if the Browns' run defense can hold up. They're one of the better run defenses in the league, and just one of the better defenses in totality in the league. I just can't wait to see the battle between the Browns' D-line and Miami's O-line with Devon Achane. Also in this matchup, we get to see Denzel Ward versus Jalen Waddle. Who's going to win that 5-star matchup? That's going to be interesting. And then going back over to Miami, how are they going to scheme out Myles Garrett? I thought Pittsburgh did pretty well last week in minimizing Myles Garrett's impact on the game. So maybe they can just look at last week's game plan and last week's film with Pittsburgh and try to replicate the same thing. This kind of ties into what I just said earlier. Was Miami's O-line going to be able to hold up for Tua? I think objectively we could say the Browns' D-line is better than Miami's O-line, but it all just depends on if Myles Garrett gets it going. And once Myles Garrett gets it going, it opens it up for the other pass rushers on that Browns D-line like Malik Collins and everyone else. So those are some of the things I'm looking forward to in this matchup. And honestly, it solely relies on it. Can Dillon Gabriel run an offense efficiently and effectively? I thought he looked decent against the Vikings. And then against the Steelers, I just think that the Steelers' pass rush got to him. The Browns' O-line was not holding up, so it's hard to judge Dillon Gabriel, but he did not look good at all against Pittsburgh. So I think this is one of the easier defenses in the league to go up against. Can Dillon Gabriel look like an average quarterback that can run an offense? That's the real question in this game. Taking everything into account, I'm picking the Miami Dolphins in this Week 7 matchup. All right, next up we have the Raiders versus the Chiefs. And it always seems like Kansas City gets upset at least once in the regular season against the Raiders. In the regular season, Max Crosby continues to wreak havoc on the Chiefs O-line, and I'm interested to see if he can affect Patrick Mahomes and the Chiefs' offensive game plan this week. Another big thing this week is that the Chiefs are finally getting back Rashee Rice. So Rashee Rice and Xavier Worthy, the offense is finally getting fully healthy. So I'm looking forward to that and seeing how a complete Kansas City Chiefs team looks. Another thing I'm looking forward to is, can Geno Smith just play better overall? Can he play a turnover-free game? That's how I think they can win the game. Geno Smith currently has 7 touchdowns and 10 interceptions, and they just invested a lot into him and gave him a big contract in the offseason. So I don't think they're going to bench him anytime soon. But he just got to play better overall for this Raiders team to start pulling out wins. And then going over to the Chiefs, like I was alluding to earlier, how Max Crosby always wreaks havoc in these matchups. Can the Chiefs O-line be able to minimize Max Crosby? Is rookie left tackle Josh Simmons going to be playing? I thought Jalen Moore looked pretty solid last week. So can Jalen Moore and Jawan Taylor, Creed Humphrey, Trey Smith, can they all minimize Max Crosby? Because if you can give Patrick Mahomes time in the pocket, he's one of the best quarterbacks in the league. And the last thing is, like I said earlier, the Chiefs are getting Rashee Rice back. How much is he going to play, and how much is he going to be incorporated into the game plan? With all that taken into account, this is my lock of the week. This is my experiment I was talking about earlier. I feel like my lock of the weeks are usually cursed. So I'm testing something out this week, and I'm picking the biggest favorite on the sports books. So I'm taking the Chiefs. They are the biggest favorites right now on Wednesday night. So I'm interested to see if my picks are cursed or am I just bad at making picks. This is my lock of the week. I'm picking the Chiefs to beat the Raiders. All right, next up we have the Philadelphia Eagles versus the Minnesota Vikings. Obviously, the Eagles are on a 2-game skid right now. Some things I'm going to be looking forward to is, can the Eagles respond and silence the haters? And Will Philly be able to get Barkley and A.J. Brown going? And more importantly, can just the Philly offense overall just have a big week? I feel like the Phillies offense and just the team overall have been very lackluster, but more importantly, the offense. It just feels very predictable, and they can't get their big players going with all the talent they have on the team. So I'm interested to see how they look against the Vikings. Another thing I'm looking forward to in this matchup is if J.J. McCarthy's even going to play this week, and maybe even if Carson Wentz plays this week. I know he was limited in practice, so if not, who's going to be starting for the Vikings, and are they going to be able to go up against the Eagles' defense? Usually is good, even though they had a very bad performance against the Giants last week. Going back over to Philly's defense, the one big question is the Phillies pass rush finally going to get home, and can they take advantage of all the injuries on the Vikings' offensive line? They have a bunch of their key players questionable this week and already out for this week, so I'm interested to see if the Eagles pass rush can finally get it going, and then can Brian Flores scheme up a good game plan against the Philly offense, which in the own Philly offensive playmakers said is a predictable offense. So I'm interested to see if Brian Flores can take advantage of the Eagles offense and how predictable and how they can't get any of the stars going. And I'm also interested to see if Philly's pass rush can get home and have Carson Wentz or Jim McCarthy running for their life. But with taking that all into account, I think the Eagles finally get back in the winning column, and I'm picking them. All right, next up, we have the Carolina Panthers versus the New York Jets. I'm very interested to see in this matchup, can Carolina finally improve 4-3 and have a positive record for the first time in a couple seasons? Also, I'm interested to see can Carolina's offense continue to score at a high pace. I think Rico Dowdle has stepped in and honestly been a better running back this season than Chuba Hubbard. So another thing I'm looking forward to is Chuba Hubbard going to get to start. And honestly, I think the best way to go about it is go 50-50. You paid Chuba Hubbard so much money in the offseason, and with how good Rico Dowdle's playing, they both have carved out roles. I think Chuba Hubbard could be more the passing down back, third down back, and Rico Dowdle could be more the pure running back. But I'm interested to see how they incorporate both the running backs. I think they're both very solid running backs when healthy. So I'm just very interested to see how this Carolina's offense in totality looks against the Jets defense. And the one big thing I'm worried about is, can the New York Jets respond and finally get their first win with their embarrassing performance in London against the Denver Broncos? And the real question is, can Justin Fields even complete a pass? I feel like the Jets O-line's giving him a decent amount of time, but he just can't complete a pass. He just crumbles under pressure and tries to run away and evade sacks. So I'm interested to see that, and then I'm also interested in the Jets game if the Jets pass rush can get home against the Carolina Panthers. But with that being said, in this Week 7 matchup, I'm taking the Panthers, and I'm taking the Jets to go 0-7. And I don't know when they're going to get their first win, but I'm not going to be picking them until they show me they can win. All right, next up, we have the Patriots versus the Titans. Obviously, the Patriots are one of the hottest teams in the NFL. Drake Maye is finally getting the respect he deserves, and he's in potential MVP conversations right now with how well he's been playing. 1,500 passing yards, 10 touchdowns, 2 interceptions, leading the Patriots to a 4-2 record. But the real question is, can the Patriots make it 5-2 against this weak Titans team? Obviously, Brian Callahan just got fired, the elephant in the room. So I'm interested to see how the interim head coach for the Tennessee Titans looks, and if they can get him a big win over the New England Patriots in this matchup. I'm also interested to see how Cam Ward looks in his first game without Brian Callahan. Will he look better or will he look worse? I think he's been solid. It shows 3 touchdowns, 4 interceptions, 1,100 passing yards. But he just hasn't had the efficient offense and some good playmakers to make some plays for him. So I can't discredit Cam Ward too much. But I just don't think that Tennessee's going to be able to stop the red-hot Drake Maye, and I'm taking the Patriots in this Week 7 matchup. All right, next up we have the Giants versus the Denver Broncos. And the one thing I'm looking forward to seeing is if the Broncos are going to be able to respond to their poor performance like I said earlier with the Jets. I think both teams look terrible. I don't want to call it a sophomore slump for Bo Nix, but he just hasn't looked the same. He hasn't had the same it factor this year. And I don't know if that's part to do with just his overall performance or with Sean Payton's play calling. I'm interested also to see if the Giants secondary can step up against Cortland Sutton and the Broncos pass catchers. I don't think the Giants secondary is very good at all. I think their offseason acquisitions have been very lackluster with Javon Holland and Paulson Adebo. And I don't think Deontay Banks is one of the best corners in the league. So I'm interested to see which one of the corners will step up. I think the Giants secondary has some bright spots with their young players in Flott and Andrew Phillips, but are they going to be able to step up against this Broncos team? I think the offense of the Broncos looked terrible last week, so I think the Broncos are going to be itching to get back out there and make a statement that they're still one of the top teams in the NFL after the Eagles in the week before. Another thing I'm curious about is if the Broncos O-line is going to be able to hold up against the Giants D-line. I think the Giants D-line is one of the best defensive lines in the league with Abdul Carter, Brian Burns, 7 sacks, Dexter Lawrence, Kayvon Thibodeau. So I can't wait to see if the Giants D-line wins the matchup against the Broncos O-line or if the Broncos are going to be able to allow Bo Nix to have a clean pocket in this matchup. And then the last thing I'm looking forward to is, can Jackson Dart continue to look good against the top defense? I think this is a big step up for him in competition. I thought he looked very well against the Eagles defense, who's pretty good. But with all that into account, I'm going to have to pick the Broncos. I could see the Giants upset, but I just think this Broncos defense is next level, and I think Jackson Dart might struggle. If he doesn't, he earns all my respect, and I think Jackson Dart has the potential to be a top quarterback in the league one of these days, but not right now. But I'm interested to see how he looks in this matchup against a top-tier defense. All right, next up, we have the Indianapolis Colts versus the Chargers. Some things I'm looking forward to in this matchup are, can the Chargers continue to run the ball effectively without their 2 top running backs and Najee Harris and Amari Hampton? I thought they ran the ball very well, considering the fact they had Kamani Vidal and Hassan Haskins as their 2 top running backs last week. So I'm interested to see if they can do that against the Colts run defense. I'm also interested to see if the Chargers offense can sustain and finish drives. I feel like the Chargers offense moves the ball pretty well, but it's always a penalty or two, or they just take a field goal. And I just think they need to be more aggressive on offense. Another thing I'm looking forward to in this matchup is who's going to be the better quarterback, who's going to have the better game between Daniel Jones and Justin Herbert. I think we can all agree that Justin Herbert's a better quarterback, but this year Daniel Jones has looked like a very good quarterback, one of the top 5, top 10 quarterbacks this year. So I think it's a genuine question of which quarterback's going to play better in this matchup. And whoever plays better in this matchup can honestly win the game for their team. And then the last thing I'm looking forward to in this matchup, are the Colts going to be able to take advantage of the banged-up Chargers online? Will Beatu Latu, DeForest Buckner, and the rest of the Colts defensive line be able to get home without their 2 top tackles in Joe Alt and Rashawn Slater? But with all that being taken into account, I'm picking the Colts in this Week 7 matchup. All right, next up, we have the Packers versus the Arizona Cardinals. Some things I'm looking forward to in this matchup are, is Kyler Murray and Marvin Harrison going to even play in this matchup? Another thing I'm looking forward to in this matchup are if the Cardinals are going to be able to run the ball well against the tough Green Bay Packers run defense. And if not, who on Arizona's offense can step up if Kyler Murray and Marvin Harrison don't play? Like, how is Jacoby Brissett going to perform this week? Now, going over to the Packers, I'm just curious of how well Jordan Love can play and if the Packers are going to be able to handle business in this matchup. I feel like the Packers have no business losing this matchup. Another thing I'm looking forward to is which receiver is going to step up in this game. Is it going to be Romeo Doubs? Is it going to be Matthew Golden? Or even the tight end, is Tucker Kraft going to have another big game? I think as the season's going on, they're expanding the role for Matthew Golden, and he's emerging into their top wide receiver 1. So I'm interested to see if this Packers offense gives Matthew Golden more reps and more looks and more touches. And then also I'm interested to see if Micah Parsons and the Green Bay Packers pass rush can get home against Arizona's online. And I think the Packers D-line is going to have an even easier matchup if Jacoby Brissett's playing. I think Kyler Murray's elusiveness and ability to make plays and run out of the pocket all the time would make it a little bit of a tougher challenge for the Green Bay's D-line. But at this stage of his career, Jacoby Brissett's kind of a statue in the pocket. So I think if he's playing, the Packers defensive line with Rashawn Gary, Micah Parsons, and everyone else should have a big game. So for that reason, I'm taking the Packers in this Week 7 matchup. The Packers should be able to handle business and remind us that they're a top team in the NFC and in the NFL. All right, next up, we have the NFC East matchup between the Commanders and the Dallas Cowboys. Now, the big question for me is, can the Washington Commanders turn back the clock and go back to how they looked last year? I thought they had a very poor performance on Monday Night Football in Week 6 against the Bears. I thought it was a game they should have easily won if they didn't fumble. I think they look like a solid team, but they just don't look as explosive. I think that could partially be due to the fact that Terry McLaurin not playing, but that can also be due to the fact that Jaden Daniels hasn't been able to play every game and start every game, so he's still getting settled in and used to this offense with Deebo Samuel and Ja'Cory Krosky Merritt. And then I'm curious if CeeDee Lamb's going to play this week. And if they're going to be able to stop CeeDee Lamb and George Pickens, I think the Commanders' secondary is not the best. But I think that can be said about the Cowboys' secondary. Will Terry McLaurin play? And if he does, who on the Cowboys' secondary is going to be able to step up and guard Terry McLaurin and Deebo Samuel? But with that being said, I just trust the Commanders a little bit more. I think their defense is a little bit better. So I'm taking the Commanders in this Week 7 matchup. Next up, we have Falcons versus the 49ers. The first question I have just for the Niners is who's going to play in this matchup? Is Brock Purdy going to play? Is George Kittle going to finally make his long-awaited return from the IR earlier in the season? Is Ricky Pearsall going to play? Is Jawan Jennings going to play like he did last week? I just feel like for the past 2 to 3 years, the 49ers continue to have injury issues. I feel like every single week we're asking who's going to play on this offense and who's not. So it's hard for Mac Jones and Brock Purdy to have continuity in this offense. So that worries me a little bit. And then for the Falcons, can they carry their momentum from their big win on Monday Night Football against the Bills in Week 6? I think another question I have is Atlanta's defense actually legit or actually good? I think since Jeff Ulbrich has taken over this defense with the talent they have on it, they've been overperforming. And I'm just wondering if this Falcons defense can be legit and let the young offense with Bijan, Michael Penix, and Drake London cook. And I think that's going to be a recipe for success if their defense can get some stops and the young offense can get some reps and get better throughout the season. And they could be a team that can sneak into the playoffs and potentially get a win. And then for the two running backs, these are two of the top running backs in the league. So I'm curious of how the Niners are going to defend Bijan Robinson. And I'm curious of how the Falcons are going to be able to minimize Christian McCaffrey, especially in the passing game. He's a leading rusher and receiver in this team, and I think he's just the whole offense. So I think if you're able to minimize Christian McCaffrey to a certain extent, it's a recipe for success and a win. But with taking everything into account, I just trust the Niners coaching staff a little bit more, so give me the Niners to win this Week 7 matchup. All right, next up, we have the first game of another Monday night doubleheader. We have the Tampa Bay Buccaneers versus the Lions. I'm just curious if the Bucs are going to be able to move the ball without 4 of their top playmakers on offense. If Mike Evans doesn't play, Chris Godwin's not expected to play, and Emeka Egbuka's not expected to play, Bucky Irving, Jalen McMillan. So is Tez Johnson, Sterling Shepard, Kate Otten, Rashad White. Are all of them going to be able to step up and make plays without the other top players on the offense? And can Baker Mayfield continue to play at an MVP level? I think Baker Mayfield's good at elevating his receivers regardless of who he's playing with. So I'm interested to see if they can pull off the upset against the Lions. And can he elevate his receivers and Tez Johnson and everyone else? If Baker Mayfield can pull off this win, I think he's a clear MVP favorite. He doesn't have 4 or 5 of his top players on offense. And if he pulls off this big upset win against the Lions and he gets his receivers looking good, I just don't think how you can discredit Baker Mayfield. And this honestly might be his best season of his whole NFL career. Going over to the Lions, can they capitalize on all of Tampa's injuries? I feel like this is a game that the Lions should win with all the Bucs injuries on offense. And I'm also interested in how the Bucs run defense is going to hold up against the two-headed monster in Jahmyr Gibbs and David Montgomery. The Lions' rushing attack is one of the better rushing attacks in the league. So I'm curious if they're going to be able to stop them. If the Lions get off to an early lead, will the Bucs be able to catch up and score like they usually do? Or will the Lions be able to run the ball efficiently and effectively and burn out some clock? And then another thing I'm looking forward to is who on Tampa's secondary is going to step up and be able to guard Amon-Ra St. Brown. I just don't see anyone in that Bucs secondary that's going to be able to. I don't think much players in the NFL can do it. With taking all that into account, with all the injuries the Bucs have, I would be very impressed if Baker Mayfield can pull off the upset win. But I'm just having to pick the Lions in this Week 7 matchup. All right, and then the last matchup for this Week 7 slate, we have the second game of the Monday Night doubleheader. We have the Texans versus the Seattle Seahawks. The things I'm looking forward to in this game will be how Houston's offense is going to look coming out of their bye. Can we finally get a big Nico Collins game? I think he's been decent this year, 312 receiving yards through 5 games since they run by. We think Nico Collins is a top 5 receiver, and I just don't think they've been using him. Part of Nico Collins' lack of success this year is due to how much time the Texans line gives C.J. Stroud to throw the ball. It's hard for these deep shots to develop, and the one question I have is, will the Texans O-line be able to step up and give C.J. Stroud a clean pocket? Because I think if you give C.J. Stroud some time, He's one of the better quarterbacks in the league. And then I'm interested in seeing the 5-star matchup this week between Jackson Smith and Jigba and Derek Stingley. Who's going to win that matchup? I think it's a very crucial matchup in this game. I think if Jackson Smith and Jigba continue his dominant season, the Seahawks are going to be unstoppable. But if Derek Stingley can slow him down and potentially get a turnover or something, I think that's this recipe to success for the Houston Texans win. I'm also interested to see, I think both defenses are solid in this matchup, but I'm interested to see which defense outshines the other defense and which defense is better. And I'm also interested to see the Texans are going to be able to run the ball effectively with Nick Chubb and Woody Marks against Seattle's defensive line. But with taking everything into account, I'm taking the Seattle Seahawks in this Week 7 matchup. All right, and that completes my Week 7 game predictions for this 2025-2026 NFL season. Please subscribe and comment on these videos. For the giveaway pot, like I said at the end of the year, for the big giveaways up to $100, it's the easiest giveaway you can enter. All you got to do is subscribe and comment on the videos. The more comments you have, the better chances you have to win. So just make sure you guys enter, and I appreciate you guys for staying tuned for this whole episode, and I'll see you guys for my Week 8 game predictions.